Good, rather late evening or afternoon, depending on your point of view, i.e. where you live. Today is Wednesday, the 15th of January, 2020. I'm Brock Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is Stumbling Block. And Peter...
Yes.
I'm still sick.
I noticed. Not as bad as you were, though.
Oh, no. And actually, so I went back and listened to our episode, listeners, because I always do a final run through before we put the thing on the air. And the next day after we made that recording, my voice was so bad that it sounded like scraping on gravel is the only way I could describe it.
Oh, wow.
And oddly enough, I was very chatty that day in German. I spent almost the whole day talking in German and messaging on Facebook in German and just yada, 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 yada. So apparently I need to get really sick more often because my inhibitions of using the German language die.
Well, imagine your gutturals get better.
It's not so much a phonetic thing. Actually, my phonetics are pretty decent. I think that comes from singing. It's more of I stop fearing making grammatical mistakes and I just sin boldly and rejoice in Christ even more boldly.
Mm-hmm.
And, Peter.
Yes.
I had my first 1 hour conversation entirely in German.
Impressive.
Yes. Now, lest I overstate it, I certainly made, the usual mistakes that any foreigner learning how to speak a living language would make.
Mm.
But it was the first time I actually tried to do it. I never would have even thought it would have been possible a year ago.
And here you are.
Well, you know what? I go to bed every night saying, Lord, give me the gift of tongues. Literally. Send your Holy Spirit on me that I may read, speak, and understand German fluently. Got a long way to go before I get there, but hey,
Yeah.
maybe the Holy Spirit works slowly.
Maybe.
So anyway, I'm so sorry. I still have a cough. But hopefully it's not as bad as last week when I was listening to the rough cut and it sounded like I was gasping for air half the time.
And I edited a lot of that out.
Our poor listeners, of course, tonight I'm doing it again, but it's not quite so bad as it was last week.
No, not so bad.
I've been walking wounded, but, I visited the witch doctor. It wasn't a witch doctor. It was the real doctor in Tübingen, and they're lovely. But anyway, I like to say the witch doctor because I've been reading a lot of Luther lately. And the witch doctor told me that it was going to be about 2 weeks.
Yep. That's pretty normal for a cold.
Well, I'm coming up to week 2, and I seem to remember that colds didn't last this long. Or do I just notice it more in my 30s?
I think you can just notice it more in your 30s. And they might last longer in your 30s. It all depends. I'm not sure. It's entirely possible.
I don't know. It's like you turn 30 and thoughts go in one ear and out the other. I mean,
Yep.
Oh, man. It's really bad. I didn't think that was going to be possible. Or, I can get so exhausted. Whereas when I just started university, I could go for 12, 13-hour days as a music major and be fine.
Yep.
Get up the next day, put the coffee on, off to class I go. I had 8 o'clock classes my entire 5 years of undergrad. Now, this morning, I had 8 o'clock Latin, and I was like, I really don't want to go today. I just don't want to go. I went, for the record.
Good.
I went. I also don't believe in skipping class unless one is sick, or the teacher's, really terrible. There was one time in undergrad where I was sick more than I probably should have been, but oh wow. But that teacher has gone on to glory now, so I was sad to hear that. Anyway, but as a rule, I don't believe in skipping class, so I went to Latin, but man, it was hard. Oh, And, it's like, I sound like such an old person in a way because I'm like, oh man, 6:30 to 9:30 is my best reading time. And I have to go to class. Fortunately, as I call it, the little slice of heaven, the Reformation history lecture, is not until 10 a.m. 10:15. Really, it says 10 a.m.,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't. But it's really 10:15, Mondays and Tuesdays. So that's no problem because I get all my reading done in that 3 hour block.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not taking the class, right? I'm not really taking any of these as a doctoral student. I'm just attending, if that makes any sense.
Right. Right.
It's kind of a privileged position to be in, actually, because everybody's worried about their exams. I'm like, well, I just have to write a 300-page dissertation,
Yeah.
Peter, I
Mm-hmm.
have news for you and our listeners.
Okay.
I need to eat my words from a month or two ago
Yes.
when I spoke about it being likely that I wouldn't sing again.
Ah, yes.
You see, um,
I want
I
the record to show that I was doubtful then.
were you?
I was.
Did you say it? I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but I was.
Okay, well, why? Okay, let's start there first of all. Before I tell this story, why were you doubtful?
Because singing isn't just something you stop doing. It'd be like me stopping playing bass or stopping playing guitar. It might be something that I stopped for a season, but I would get back to it eventually.
Well, I was wrestling with a lot of things, I think, and I went to a worship at the Stiftskirche. I always talk about the Stiftskirche out here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the Sunday after Christmas. No, it was the second Sunday after Christmas. I can't remember what liturgical day that is. And there was a glorious Bach cantata for the worship. It was cantata number 4 from the Christmas Oratorio, or was it 5? Cantata number 5, I think. And just wonderful. And I had this aching longing in me to sing Bach again. Utterly aching longing
Mm-hmm.
to sing Bach. And so I mentioned it to my beloved secondary supervisor, and he forwarded me a link. And the link was to, you guessed it, the Tübingen Bach Corps, with which, as of last night at 10:15 p.m., I am now officially a member of.
There you go.
But get this, we're not singing any Bach this spring. We are singing Antonin Dvorak's Stabat Mater, which is a piece that I last sung when I was, actually not last, the only time I've sung it, when I was, I think I was 19.
Oh, wow.
I was either 19 or 20 when I sang the Stabat Mater. And then, and it's a glorious piece. Oh my God, the ending movement, the chorus goes a cappella for about 8 bars, and it is 8 bars of heaven. Of course, it's supposed to be because they're talking about heaven, but anyway,
Right.
or paradise rather. And in addition to the Stabat Mater, we are doing selections from one of my very favorite works, the Brahms Requiem, which is a piece that I sang, oh dear, oh, I don't know, I was 20 or 21 when I sang the Brahms Requiem. And so, I know these pieces, like much of the great masterworks of choral music, I was quite fortunate in college that I got to sing a lot of those masterworks of choral music.
Mm-hmm.
But even the ones I haven't sung are kind of just in my bones. Or if not the entire piece, movements of the entire piece, like the Dies Irae from the Verdi Requiem,
Right.
with the booming timpani is always, rather several timpanis, is always in my bones. But it's so fascinating for me to return, particularly the Stabat Mater, in my 30s versus being basically a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And, I realized something, Peter.
What?
Damn, the print on the score is small.
You're gonna need to get reading glasses, old man.
Oh, God. Well, the trouble I've had with my eyes. I had the cornea transplant 3 years ago, and I just don't... My eyes are bad enough that it's just difficult for me. I don't know how to put it. So, and I didn't have my own score last night. I was trying to read off someone, but I'll have my own score next week. So, I'll just hold it right up to my face and everything will be fine.
That's good.
But that's definitely something that has changed from when I was 20.
Nice.
Although I think we used a different edition than the one that we're using now. And so maybe it's just the other edition was bigger print. Or it's my eyes. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go with it might be somewhat my eyes.
Okay.
So, I had bifocals and now I don't have them, but I have such a strong prescription in my left eye that my left eyeglass lens looks like a Coke bottle.
I also have a very strong prescription, so I feel your pain.
Well, it's kind of fun, actually. I love tricking my friends. Hey, try my glasses on. It never gets old. It's something I learned in college. Apparently, I've never grown up.
Well,
Growing up is overrated.
It is overrated.
But Peter, I was going to say, you were saying that me stopping singing would be like you stopping bass. I would have to go a step further for myself. And even though I hold to everything I said, I don't want to sit in another... Actually, no, that's a lie. I am sitting in another professional music class, but I'll tell you more about that in a second.
Oh, gosh.
I don't want to do additional formal schooling in music. I think I'm done with that.
Right.
I think that is... I don't have the patience. And I certainly don't have the dedication.
You're as good as you want to be.
And I don't find myself particularly good. I find myself deeply drawn more.
Right.
For me, to stop all musical activity would be the same thing as to never read, study, or write theology again.
No, exactly. I know exactly how you feel about that.
Okay. Yeah, those two things are so closely intertwined for me. But the other interesting musical thing for me is I'm in a class in the Stift. Since I'm living at the Stift, we have to do what's called a locus, one a semester. And so the one I'm doing is on the Bach St. Matthew Passion. A piece that I first got a superficial surface level acquaintance with in high school. Studied in depth with my choir director when I was 20 years old. The same semester I was singing the Stabat Mater, actually. So I was 20. I wasn't 19. I misspoke. I was 20 with the Stabat Mater. And sang when I was 22. I sang the Matthew Passion. And now I'm in this class exploring it. And it's all in German. And I just got this lovely new book on Bach on the Matthew Passion. And that's another one that it's so fascinating for me to return to.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a piece that I listen to the Matthew Passion all the time. I mean, it's like, I'm driving down the road, turn on the Matthew Passion. It's just kind of with me the way the Beatles are with other people.
Right.
Feel free to call me weird, or you can, in fact, call me a snob like all my friends over here do.
No, I mean, different people have different things that move them, particularly when it comes to music, and I do my best not to judge on that point.
You're very kind. My idea of a good Friday night when I was 20 years old was a cigar and a professional choral music journal and Glenn Gould playing the Bach well-tempered clavier.
I'm friends with someone named after Glenn Gould. Yeah, his name is Glenn Gould, but he's not that Glenn Gould.
I just want to know if you find that snobbish as well, because I had a whole family tell me I was snobbish.
I don't think that's snobbish. I mean...
That's how I spent my Friday nights. I should have been out partying.
Whatever. I, used to sit and listen to the intricacies of Les Claypool's bass playing on Primus albums and things like that, so...
You and I have so many weird things in common.
Yeah, in common yet different.
Isn't that funny? No wonder this podcast works.
Yep.
Well, Peter, let's sort of use this as a springboard here, whatever we're doing. Because you have a little inside joke when you record this that I'd like you to share with your
I
listeners.
do, and some of you probably notice, if you stop and think about it when you're listening to it, I pan myself just a little, because it doesn't sound good if we both come through straight down the middle channel. It's better if we're slightly what's called panned, which means that one of us is more to the left and the other one's more to the right. I pan myself slightly to the left and Brock slightly to the right. It's my little ironic inside joke.
So I think it's so funny that you put me slightly to the right of you when you always accuse me of being such a liberal.
Well, that's why it's my little funny inside joke, right?
But
It's ironic.
But here's the interesting thing, Peter. I'm not actually convinced that I'm that liberal.
I'm not, you may not be, but you're still probably to the left of me.
Well, it depends on what.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something that you're more conservative than me on, and I'm having trouble.
I would say methodology.
In that you have one?
I'm getting one, Peter. This is so see, us doing this podcast apparently is called Brock airing Brock's personal demons, because our podcast a while ago where I talked about no methodology and all that stuff has led to a very interesting development. Peter.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the name Oswald Bayer?
No.
And you call yourself a student of Steve Paulson?
No, I don't.
Okay, then. But you took classes with him.
I did take a class with him, yes.
Oh, only one class. I
Yeah.
thought you took several.
No.
I mean, let's be real. If I had gone to Luther for my MDiv, I probably would have taken 8 classes with him. Let's be real. I'm just waiting for you to note the irony of that.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here.
Well, Oswald Bayer is a very well-respected Tübingen theologian who actually Steve Paulson has done a lot to promote in America.
Mm-hmm.
Oswald Bayer is utterly fantastic. That I have no other word for it. I have a meeting with him at the end of this month to specifically about the question of scientific methodology around reading Luther.
Mm.
Bayer is a Luther scholar who does systematic theology from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he's already given me homework for the end of the month. Don't you love it?
Oh, gosh.
What?
No, yep, that's being in grad school.
It's funny, it's not called grad school here, but I understand what you mean. So, as I'm reading his book, in the plural, by the way, Vitor Vestela was very good friends with him.
Ah.
And as a matter of fact, I think one can fruitfully say there are commonalities between the two of them. But as I'm reading Bayer, I'm going, I agree with almost everything he's saying regarding methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to speak of theology as connected to both the church and the academy. And so in using Luther to make the argument. So the notion of monastic theology grounded in the divine service, Gottesdienst, German, worship. And then the scholastic side of it being the scientific academic discipline of theology, which belongs to the first use of the law. So my mind is like just blowing up when I'm reading all of this, because I'm like, yes, this is the grounding of everything I've been trying to hold together around reading Luther.
Mm-hmm.
And he bases his work with Luther off of Luther's 3 rules for studying theology, which you can find in the preface to the complete Wittenberg edition of Luther's writings from 1539. That's the most accessible one. And then before that, you've got to go into the Psalm lectures. But in this preface, Luther speaks of these three rules: oratio, meditatio, tentatio. Have you heard this?
Oration, meditation, and I don't know the
And
last one.
agonizing assault by Satan.
Oh, temptatio. I thought you said
Tentatio.
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 Okay.
Tentatio. And that is how this notion of this strange thing called being a theologian, as you reflect on the scripture, and yet you try to be an academic discipline as well, that is how it's all held together, are these three rules for theology, and rooted in promissio, in promise. So there's a line in the formula of Concord, just to use a concrete example of what I mean by promise. If the words of institution are omitted from a Mass, you do not have the Lord's Supper. To take Bayer's claims seriously, and he really digs deep into Luther from early all the way to the end of Luther's career. The reason the words of institution are so important is that's the promise. It's the promise that comes from outside of ourselves. Are you seeing also the connection here to Steve Paulson?
Right.
And so Paulson always talks about, I choose you. What he means by that is that's God's concrete promise spoken to you from somebody speaking in the name of Jesus. So it's the power of language, to take it back to Bayer. Bayer really makes me reconsider my notions around, I would have said at one time, well, language doesn't matter, say whatever you want. I'm not sure about that, because there really isn't anything that has the same kind of power as I'm baptized.
Right.
Or speaking the one doing the absolving, I forgive you.
Right.
Jesus Christ died for you.
Right. The absolution is always my favorite part of the liturgy to do. It was always so powerful to me every time.
But it's not just in the liturgy. You can do it at the dive bar.
No, I know, but I'm just talking about, as a person who loves the liturgy, it's my favorite part of the liturgy.
Well, and that, you may resonate that with Bayer then, because everything for him is related to the liturgy. Not in the sense of liturgical form, but in the importance of the promise that you hear through the word and the sacraments.
Right.
I want to read a little something from Bayer's book, Martin Luther's Theology, A Contemporary Interpretation. Have you heard of this book?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, I now, as I'm working through this is not the one Bayer assigned me, by the way. I read that one, and now I'm reading this one as well, and then I have to read some additional in German. But he says this regarding the difference between the professional theologian and the Christian. Because for Luther, every Christian is a theologian, because every Christian undergoes the trial from Satan in life. And in some ways you can say the trial by God. Okay, so here Bayer says this. This is way at the beginning of the book. The professional theologian who undergoes training by the arts faculty and is thereby trained in the academic discipline of quaestio and disputatio, Bayer really likes his Latin, by the way, is really not to be distinguished from any other Christian. In fact, not even from any other human being who has also been given the ability to reason. An academically trained theologian is to be differentiated from other Christians who, as Christians, have already begun to be theologians as well, only in the fact that, and this is his professional calling, he is asked to give an account of the Christian faith by forming intellectual statements. This means he is to craft statements that attain to the highest possible level of accuracy. That's why methodology is important, Brock. Oh, no, the text doesn't say that, by the way. I added that.
Yeah.
Uh, and yet, theology does not simply have as its task a responsibility to academe. In a primary way, and in its essence, it has a responsibility to speak to the world. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Then there's a lovely section in here on kairos in Luther's theology, which I loved. The notion of the liberal arts, but I want to find the. I'm not going to go through the oratio, tentatio, meditatio, but I wanted to share something about promise on here, and I wanted to discuss that with you.
Okay.
Okay, promisio as the speech act that gives confidence. This is what it is. Here we go. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
In contrast to every metaphysical set of statements that teach about the deity, this assertion that declares God's truth and will are not abstract entities, but are directed verbally and publicly as a concrete promise to a particular hearer in a specific situation. God is apprehended as the one who makes a promise to a human being in such a way that the person who hears it can have full confidence in it. God's truth is grounded in his faithfulness, in which he stands by the word that has gone forth from him. God has obligated himself in such a way by the baptismal promisio that was spoken at a previous time. The one who is engaged in the agonizing struggle, that's how the translators have translated Anfechtung, empowered and encouraged by the message that comes from the spoken word of the sermon, can be touched each time in a new way when this one specific promise goes forth. In this way, he can let himself be torn away both from his self-glorification and from despair.
That's powerful.
That is so powerful. How does that reading square with the way you learned Lutheran theology?
It squares very much with how I learned it. My core Lutheran theology class was from Paulson.
Right, who's a big fan of Bayer, as I was saying.
Right, exactly. So a lot of that sounds familiar-ish. I think it's one of the interesting things to me with Lutheranism in terms of some of this is the way that we expect the word to be declared. I was just reflecting on this. I think you can effectively preach the gospel through art as well as through words.
Oh, Bayer wouldn't like that. Neither
I know.
would Luther.
Well, I know, but you have to reach the illiterate somehow.
Well, actually, believe it or not, you would have a strong commonality with Paul Tillich.
Huh.
Regarding art. He's got an essay on theology of art and the theology of culture.
Because for me, some of my most moving experiences have come in connection to art and music and things like that.
Well, music, I think Luther would resonate with, and even art too. I mean, Luther, as we know, had no problem with images and
Right.
so forth.
Right.
But music, because that is the preached word. If you're thinking sacred music, anyway.
Well, but I find God in all kinds of music. Even, some popular music I find incredibly moving.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Music that would not be traditionally considered sacred.
So you would challenge then this reading that I was doing from Professor Bayer?
I don't know that I want to challenge it as much as I want to expand it.
Let me look at my index here and see if he does that in the end. I'm not far enough into this particular book. I'm only 68 pages in, and it's 354. So
oh my gosh!
I'll let you know. Oh, this is nothing. The German text for one of the other books that I read is 530 pages.
Oh my gosh!
Because he's not only writing about the Reformation, he's taking on, and this is actually what I find so fascinating about him, he's really taking modernity to task, but in a slightly different way than you do, I'm afraid.
Well, that's, we all have our own ways to go about things.
He's taking on modernity, actually, the way that I dare say I would. In that I think modernity has lost, by and large, this notion of external proclaimed promise. So I've got no problem with God being found in art and the symbolic power of art. Yes, I accept that and have experienced it. But there's nothing quite like when I came to my Greek professor at PLTS 8 years ago, whatever it was, I can't remember, collapsed and devastated. It was my Greek professor because I just moved there and he was the only person nearby. And this professor said to me, "Remember your baptism." No one had ever said that to me before in my life. That was a proclaimed word, and it did something. Because in my worst moments, I have that memory. Not only that memory, but I have so many other memories from the Lutherans in my life who have, or those who are influenced by the notion of an external promise. They haven't all been Lutherans, but most of them have. Where they have said things like that, and that sticks with me. And I think that is something, were I to do a critique of current theology, I think that is something that current theology largely undervalues.
That's fair enough.
Have you experienced anything like this?
Not, well, some, but none of it sticks with me like that. For me, the moments that stick with me are the moments, the sort of that I call just God in me. My moments out in nature, my moments out fishing, or particularly on the water. I find myself strongly drawn to water.
This is so interesting right now because you always call me the liberal.
I know.
You know the reason I love Rudolf Bultmann so much is his preaching, right?
Yeah, I do know that. I know you're very into his preaching.
Yeah. Even though I have some disagreements with him, and Bayer is actually helping me see where those disagreements are. In other words, Bayer is flaring up the confessional side of me that was going to sleep for a while. I've kind of missed it,
Yeah.
There's nothing like, it's like when I read Gerhard Ferdie's when God Meets Man, Where God Meets Man, really needs a gender updating. But anyway, have you read that?
I've probably read excerpts from it. I don't think I've read the whole thing.
I read that on my internship year. It was before Ferdie got political. And political in the sense of angry at LGBT and angry at the Episcopals and all that. It was from the 70s I opened that book and I read it and I remember just saying, "I'm home." And reading this from Bayer, not only am I saying I'm home, but I'm saying this is why I'm Lutheran. This is definitively why I'm not Reformed. Not because the Reformed don't have good Protestant theology, but I don't know any other tradition that emphasizes a preached, proclaimed promise the way Luther and the Lutherans who follow Luther do. And notice I worded that very carefully. But please tell me if you think I'm wrong.
I don't think so. I don't think I know enough about some of those theologians to say whether or not you're wrong.
Oh, that could be scary. Maybe I haven't found the preached word adequately in some of the other traditions, but it's particularly Martin Luther that accents this.
Right.
It's the consolation for the terrified conscience.
Yes.
So in my wanderings through various denominations and various things, I hadn't, and still haven't yet, by the way, found a theology that emphasizes relief the same way Luther's does. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of opposite of what we were doing last week. Last week we were critiquing the Article 16 of the Augsburg Confession, but this week I want to lift up, not to say it's the only way, but it is to say there's something here that I think needs to be held on to, and it is that notion of promise.
Right. I think the closest you might come is in the less extreme forms of Calvinism. And I'm not saying they get there totally. I'm just saying that's probably the closest you'd get.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. My sighing was I was just trying to think as I've been reading Barth, if I was hearing some of that, not in quite the same way as with Luther, but I think Barth, particularly with the doctrine of election, does in fact get close to this. But he is doing the dogmatic science underlying it.
Right.
Rather than the actual proclaiming of it. Well, that's not fair. Sorry, I've misrepresented him. He is proclaiming it in a way, but not in the same way as the oral word of the sermon.
Okay.
I actually love reading sermons. As I said, I'm this, this big fan of Rudolf Bultmann's preaching. But in a sense, a sermon is like the Bach St. Matthew Passion. If you hear it pre-recorded or read it pre-written, the performative power of the oral word can be lessened a little bit. But paradoxically, the promises of Scripture remain the promises of Scripture even when we read them alone. But in good Lutheran fashion, that needs to be balanced with the communal hearing and the vocal praying. But Bayer talks about vocal praying. This is very interesting to me. Vocal praying and, by the way, vocal reading aloud of the Bible. Taking it from Luther. That the meditatio was an aloud and a communal act.
Right, Bonhoeffer would agree with that.
Interesting, right?
In Life Together, right? He talks about reading the Bible together.
And yet...
Now, that would be an interesting book for us. That's a relatively short read and critique we could do on here sometime.
I have it on my Kindle somewhere, otherwise I have it in German.
I have it in my trunk.
That's hilarious. I liked Life Together. I read it for my Bonhoeffer seminar last year.
I mostly like it. There are some things I take issue with, but...
What are some of those things, just out of curiosity?
Unison singing, for one.
Yeah, that was kind of odd, but he wanted to make sure, you don't get arrogant and sing louder than the person next to you.
I understand that, but I think that when it comes to... Because he doesn't just believe in, unison singing in octaves, but all literally on the same note. Which I think then becomes a hardship for some people.
Well, Bonhoeffer also, in that period, because that's the period of discipleship too, Bonhoeffer really struggles with the third use of the law. And that just, will the third use of the law please die and never come back?
Well, there are some people who say there is no such thing as the third use of the law.
Correct, and I'm one of them. I don't think... And by the way, all these Lutheran guys that we were just talking about also would say there is not a third use of the law in Luther. The Lutheran theologians, at least in the American context, who hold to the third use, Karl Broughton is the only one I know directly who holds to it. I'm not sure if Robert Jensen does. He may. But I know Karl Broughton does. But the rest of them, all the rest of the confessional guys that are ELCA, that are not Missouri Synod, don't have a third use.
Okay. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I just know that it's a debate that happens and it's fun to poke at sometimes.
All right, so poke at it with me. It's one of my favorite things to debate, particularly since I'm in a context where third use is around.
So how do you understand the third use of the law? in its non-existence.
It's really, look, if the third use of the law exists, Jesus Christ died for nothing. There.
Ooh.
Period.
Ooh. Bold
No,
statement.
No, that's one I'm happy to make. See, I really should not have begun reading Oswald Bayer because he really awakened the Lutheran in me. The Lutheran was asleep for a few months.
Yeah. My understanding, the way I've most commonly heard, again, I've most commonly heard the third use of the law described by people who don't believe it exists. But it seems to primarily be the first use of the law rehashed.
Correct, except it's the first use of the law rehashed. But the problem is there has to be something in addition to justification. Jesus Christ is not really the end of the law. There has to be just something a little more now that's gotta guide us. It's gotta do something now. God has to want something now. No. In justification, when we daily return to our baptism and we die to the old Adam, or as old Adam, old Eve, or as Tim Wangert so delightfully said in 2015, slay that old sucker one more time. When that is done, that's it. You are rejuvenated. In the best sense of the term, rejuvenated. And it's a daily, hourly, by-the-minute process. That's the simul justus et peccator. Mm-hmm. So the notion of the immediate critique, and this comes from both the right and the left. From the right, the critique is, oh, gosh, we don't have this third use. Uh-oh, those people are going to go do some non-Christian things like drink and smoke, and well, you can fill in the rest yourself. That's the critique on the right. But on the left, and the one on the right, you can just kind of go, oh, get over yourself. But on the left, it can end up being a bit worse, actually, in my opinion, because the third use of the law becomes the standpoint from which you engage radical politics. So instead of radical politics being about freedom, being about a response to justification entirely generated from the Spirit, it becomes something you are either commanded or compelled to do.
Right.
The words commanded and compelled are the law. The law is done now. Moses is dead. Get over it. As Luther says. I'm paraphrasing Luther a little bit. The get over it part, I think. The law has its function to curb sin, to use the wonderful faculty of reason in the world, such as the academic discipline of theology, to hold the mirror up to us to show us what we can never attain, i.e., the perfect fulfilling of the first commandment. But the first commandment is actually God's promise to us. I am your God, you will be my people. This is a statement of promise. But as sinners, to use that controversial word that needs to be played with a little bit, we have a hard time hearing that promise. So, pause. The action in justification is that continual return to the first commandment. And by having no other God than the Lord, then naturally good works will bubble up from you. This is not quietism. The failure, particularly in some of the Lutheran pietistic traditions in the States, is that failure to say you are created in Christ Jesus for good works. Or, to use that pithy phrase that I don't think Luther actually said, but we paraphrase him, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does.
Right.
So it's not that we're quietists and we're anti-work. There is a new obedience, but the new obedience is not a tertius usus legis. The new obedience is the bubbling up as a response to justification. How am I doing? I really don't like the third use of the law. Can you tell?
I may have picked up on that.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Was it? Was it there?
Yeah, that.
It's funny because a lot of the confessional theologians, as you know, really would not like my existence, and yet in this regard, I agree with some of the most conservative Lutheran scholars.
Yeah.
The irony is not lost on me, but I would take it to radically different conclusions. I get, by the way, to my political position of a democratic socialism based on everything I just told you.
Right.
But tell me what you think of third use of the law.
I lean towards it being a rehashing of the first use of the law. I think the third use of the law comes in when you want our death and rebirth to not be a continual ongoing thing. Like, it, we're constantly becoming resubmitted to the first use, if that makes sense.
Constantly becoming resubmitted to the first use.
Like we're sorry, go ahead.
We're constantly dying to the law.
Right.
How is that being resubmitted to the first use?
Well, what I mean is, like, so there are people who argue that we are no longer bound to the first use of the law after baptism.
Can you explain that a little further for me?
That because baptism is the first use of the law is meant to drive us to baptism and to Christ, and so once we have
not the first use, that's
the second use. Sorry.
The first use is the political use.
That's right. The first use is the political use.
But you have to think in terms of Luther's notion of the three estates: oikonomia, politeia, and ecclesia. So it's a whole medieval understanding of production and worship and life in the world, and how theology actually gets public when all of those things are kept together. Peter, I think you need to ground me from reading Lutheran theology, because like this bear in me woke up the last couple weeks.
Oh.
Have you been missing it?
No, I mean, yes, but no, in that I don't think you've ever completely lost it. And yes, in that I love your passion for it.
It's such a strange thing to be, but it's so liberating, right? I mean, isn't it liberating?
Mm-hmm. So I've just created a poll on our Facebook page for is there a third use of the law?
Oh no. I'm gonna get in so much trouble.
No, you're not. Anyway,
well,
I'm looking forward to the results.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the results too. Tell us if you think there's a third use. If you think I'm full of it. My polemic here is to Lutherans. I fully expect that other Protestant traditions, such as the Reformed, would have a third use of the law, and would have a more fully developed third use of the law. What I'm trying to point out, number one, I don't like it, even if it is fully developed in other traditions. I still don't think I don't think it's right. Number one, because it minimizes justification and it minimizes that external promise.
Right.
So that's my critique of it. But number two, I want Lutherans to realize that when Lutherans talk this way, it's no longer really Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
That's my polemical goal, is to get people to realize, what are we actually saying? And by the way, this is on the left, as I was saying earlier. It's on the left and it's on the right. It's just, it manifests itself differently. In the left, it manifests itself in terms of radical social justice movements, which, by the way, I happen to agree with. But I get to that position of a radical social justice movements radically, to use that word again, differently than the third use of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right, it manifests itself as a kind of moralism, the things a good Christian doesn't do.
Right.
either way, you're still a slave to the law.
Right.
Well, my God, it's bad enough we're a slave to sin. We have to be a slave to the law, too. The law, which in and of itself is wholly just and good, but because of the human heart, and this is where I'm going to borrow this from Tillich, by the way, that I think he's so brilliant with his notion of religious socialism because he supported the best of the Marxist tradition, but he rejected any and all utopias because of the depth of evil in the human heart.
Yes. And
that depth of evil in the human heart, let's look at our pending conflicts in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, somebody told my liturgics professor in seminary, said she didn't believe in Satan.
Oh, gosh.
My liturgics professor could be a grumpy cat occasionally. He said to her, "Have you looked out the window lately?" Well, Peter, I've awakened a sleeping dragon within myself. You're free to obviously tell me I'm full of it now.
I don't think you're full of it. I think a lot of what you said makes sense.
All right, what do you disagree with?
I don't know. I've just stop and think about it. It's been a long time since I've talked about the third use of the law. And again, I never really came down hard on one side or the other in seminary, primarily for social reasons.
What do you mean? Oh, because you had friends on both sides? Or?
Yeah.
There were people at Luther's seminary who held to a third use of the law?
Yes.
I'm shocked.
Really? Oh, yeah, you came after Sundberg.
Oh, well, he was Reformed anyway, wasn't he?
Well, he was technically Lutheran.
Yeah, see, that little adjective that you put there?
Yeah.
See my point now?
I was just saying.
Didn't he refer to himself as a crypto-Calvinist?
No, someone accused him of being a crypto-Calvinist, and he said, "Who you calling crypto?"
Well, I mean, I don't care.
That's the story, anyway.
No. And he taught confessions, or?
No, he taught history.
Okay, so now we got to say, because I can anticipate this from some of our listeners, there is a section on the third use of the law in the Formula of Concord.
Mm-hmm.
It's a committee compromise. They fudge it. And a book that does really well at not only putting this in historical context, but also for practice in the church is Timothy Wangert's A Formula for Parish Practice, mm-hmm. where he talks about the third use of the law and puts it to rest where it belongs.
Right.
Well, I'm really not being objective, am I?
You? Shocking. I mean, either of us. This is not an objectivist podcast.
I can try harder. Would you like me to be more neutral next week?
Not really.
Well, Bayer talks about theology is supposed to be polemical.
Mm-hmm.
But the question then it's got to be both in a way, right? I mean, you've got to state what you think, but then you've also got to be willing to listen to what the other side or sides believe, and you want to have dignity and respect and all these things as well. I'm not sure Luther is very good for that, by the way.
Yeah.
The second part. The first part he's really good at. The second part, well, my favorite line at the Wittenberg Concord in, when was that? 1534 or 37? I'm forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I crush the flesh of Christ with my teeth.
Yep.
That's all you got?
I'm kind of out of it, not to lie.
Why?
I was just very tired.
Oh, well, I was tired, and then I got all fired up about the third use of the law. Now I'm going to be awake for the next 3 hours.
Sorry.
It's all your fault.
I know. I'm terrible.
Well, next week we'll return to our question of just war and death penalty and all of that. And this was just a little interlude to, after critiquing the Lutheran tradition, and I think we did a fair bit of that last week.
Yes, we did.
To then this week take the opposite side and say, here's really what one of the core issues of why I think we both agree one can be Lutheran today.
Yeah.
Until next week, I am your friendly neighborhood systematician, Brach Jennings.
I'm Peter Clark.
And this has been Stumbling Block.
Stumbling Block is a production of Silver Turkey Studios. Our Patreon producer is Ben Dittman, our executive producer is Peter Clark, and our executive director is Brach Jennings. Our theme music is by Mirrors for Windows, and we are hosted by Podbean. We can be reached by email at stumblingblockpodcast@gmail.com. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/stumblingblock. And as always, thank you for listening.